Hello and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today for the D Word. I'm Sabir Pervez, a reporter for BBC Look North, and chairing this fabulous panel discussion today. Before we introduce the panel members, let's make sure everything is working for our guests online. We can't hear or see you, but we can pick up any comments or questions you have for us today. So please do make use of the question and answer section, and I'll do my best to get answers for you during the session. It's the final day for South Asian Heritage Month, and we mark its end by the D word. Over the last couple of years, diversity has again become the forefront of conversations. But we know that the case for diversity has had a very strong base in evidence, but historically, we've seen investment dwindle and increase in the public sector. We also know how diverse our district is, with around 38% of our population being minoritized communities according to the census data in 2011, which is an increase over the last decade. How can we truly make meaningful, long-term and sustainable change that ensures that everyone, regardless of background, does well here? How can we make sure that diversity isn't just another buzzword or flavour of the month? These are just some of the questions we'll be posing for our panel today. But before we invite our panel members into the conversation, I'm delighted to introduce Foluke Ajayi, Chief Executive of Airedale NHS Foundation Trust, who will officially open the meeting for us today. Foluke has a keen interest and experience in workforce and people development, in particular in leadership development for everyone. She's a champion for diversity, inclusivity and personalisation, strongly believing that every individual in an organisation is vital, wherever they work, whatever they do, bringing a richness to services for individuals and communities. She also brings a wealth of knowledge and understanding of the changing NHS landscape and its implications for health, care, VCSE sectors and beyond. Foluke, over to you.
Thank you, Sabia. A real pleasure to be here this morning. And what's really important for us is being part of the Bradford District Health and Wellbeing Board is about what do we bring into the conversation? How do we amplify voices? And in particular, in this month that we're celebrating South Asian heritage, there's something about really understanding the communities in which we live and work, and how do we help individuals to thrive? And that's been the focus for the Health and Wellbeing Board, is about how do we improve the health and well-being of all. And I'm really delighted that I'm joined by colleagues today who will really help us in shaping the conversation, who are bringing leadership into this agenda. So really, really proud to be here.
Thank you, Foluke. Now we've got an exciting lineup of speakers today. Honestly, they're all amazing. And they're joining me on the sofa. You've heard from Foluke Ajayi already, Chief Executive of Airedale NHS Foundation Trust. Welcome again, Foluke. We have Kim Shutler, MBE. Kim is the Chief Executive of the Cellar Trust. She's passionate about the role of charities and is involved on a number of different boards. Kim was awarded an MBE for services to mental health in 2022. We have Mohammed as the head of Stronger Community, Bradford Council. Mahmood has managed various programs that work in neighbourhoods to promote community voice, integration and cohesion. We have Professor Archibong, a PhD, MBE, who has a fabulous dress sense. Udi is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Bradford. Udi is at the forefront of transforming organisational culture for sustainable diversity and inclusion approaches. Her research has provided a unique international definition of positive action and application for representational and participative, diversity. And we have Dr. Sohail Abbas. Sohail is the Director of the Reducing Inequalities Alliance, Bradford District and Craven Health and Care Partnership, and Deputy Medical Director for the NHS West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board. Sohail is passionate about system working and harnessing the power of communities. Welcome to you all. We're going to start these questions. I guess first, as we're kicking off, I want to know how in your organisation you've enabled people to bring their whole self to work to achieve diversity. So one highlight that you've kind of helped, and I'm going to go around and ask you all to answer that. So Hill, we're going to start with you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I would say, I would talk about system, because system is, we have multiple organizations in Bradford District and Craven in West Yorkshire. One thing that I would say, that in order to bring about change, we need visible senior leadership, the buy-in and the visibility. And we are fortunate that we have that in both Bradford District and Craven and in West Yorkshire, whether it's Chief Executive Rob Webster backing up our, for example, Root Out Racism campaign, whether it's our chair of the Wellbeing Board, whether it's our chief executives, our Mel Pickup, Susan, Foluke as the chief executive of Airedale Trust. So the visibility and the buy-in of the senior leadership, I would say that is important. We are fortunate to have that in our system.
Thank you, Sohail. Buddy?
I think for the University of Bradford, where I'm Pro Vice Chancellor for Equality and Diversity, one of the big things at the forefront of my mind is, how do people feel the inclusion that we say we are about? So one of the big things that I am doing in my role is actually empowering people to join in conversations. So we have a very strong culture of opening up conversations. Some of them are contested, and so what? But having everybody to have the opportunity and empowered enough to join in the conversations. So we run a program called Can You Hear Me? And Can You Hear Me is a program that we park anywhere, sometimes at the atrium, and just get people to come to talk to us about dignity and respect issues, challenges around possible homophobia on campus, issues of sexual harassment, whatever, but it's giving people a voice, magnifying that voice through an environment that allows people to join in conversations, and we are very, very intentional about it. And I believe that inclusion has got to be intentional, otherwise you're wasting time.
Fantastic. I think I'm glad you mentioned inclusion, because I read a quote, and I want to bring this up. It says, it's from Verna Meyer. She's the Netflix president of inclusion, and she says, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. So I think whilst we're on this topic, it's really important to make sure we talk about inclusivity as well. Mahmood, what highlight would you talk about?
So there's several things. So, we're talking about staff coming comfortably to work, being themselves. So there's a number of things the council does. So on the basic level, there's facilities. So if people have got multi-faith prayer rooms, they can feel that they can come to work. They don't need to leave the building to have their daily prayers and things like that. And that's for all the different faiths. So it's open to everybody. And those of no faith who just want time to contemplate. So there's that. And the other thing the council has just recently created, and we used to have them before, but gone back to now, are staff networks. And a common thing we're hearing amongst the panel speakers is voice influence. What do people feel about working in their work environment, and how can we get that message to the leadership to make the small changes? In some cases, the large changes, in terms of interviews, techniques, the systems we've been running for many, many years. How can we adapt those interview techniques to make sure there's a level playing field? And for many years, we were trying to get Eastern European communities into even the low-level jobs. And we found the traditional sort of interview system wasn't working. So that's been adapted. So it's not so formal in a sense. It's more about people expressing their own skills and abilities in different ways. And we were able to recruit some wardens in the council. So there's a whole kind of cross system kind of working. But it's listening to people. I think it's really important. And the message gets heard by staff networks by creating these opportunities for people to input.
And it's access, isn't it? It's that, and speaking in their language.
Yeah, and we can go on. I mean, we can go on for lots of things that happen. So, for example, flexible working. So, people who've just been on maternity or they've got other issues at home, young children, so they can work at home and then come to work as well. So it's flexible working, and that really helps as well.
Fantastic. Kim?
Yeah. So I run a mental health charity, and one of the most important things that we've done, I suppose, in people bringing their whole selves to work is that most of my team have got their own lived experience of mental health problems, and actually purposefully recruit people to bring that to work and use it to deliver mental health services. And I think you've got to create an environment when people can talk about that really openly, right from the senior leaders, the trustees to, to all our members of staff. But on this, I suppose I wanted to be really honest and say probably my proudest moment around this is a few years ago, just noticing that probably, even though we tried to create an environment that was inclusive and people could bring their whole selves, we probably weren't doing enough intentionally around diversity in its broadest sense. And taking a pause and being prepared to listen and learn and think, right, actually, do you know what? Whatever we've been doing, it's not enough. And being really intentional about making some quite radical changes and doing things differently to, so that's, I think taking a pause as a leader and saying, right, okay, not good enough, what next? And continuing that journey and recognising it's a long journey is probably something that I think has been really important as part of my leadership and our organisation.
Thank you, Kim. Foluke.
Yeah, and one of the things that we do in Airedale is encourage colleagues to talk about what they do outside of work, because we all come into work and we have the work face, the work presentation, and particularly in the hospital where we have many of our workforce are in uniform, actually what's behind that person. And so we will promote activities that people are participating outside of work. So somebody might say, oh, I'm going to go on a trail walk and I'm raising money for this particular charity, or the local school that my child is in is doing X, Y, and Z. And because you do that, people start to understand and appreciate what other activities are happening, both in the local area, because majority of my colleagues live and work in the area. And therefore, it opens up a gateway into the sort of things that are happening. And so, we have a vast number of Indian nurses, for example, and when they are doing celebration events, they will promote what they're doing and invite colleagues to join them, so that there's that movement between and outside of work. You are not just the person at work. What happens at home is just as important. It influences the way you present at work. And so opening up that gateway so people can share their experiences outside of work, for me, is part of bringing your whole self into work.
And just on that point about bringing your whole self to work, how do you guys, celebrate your heritage and bring your whole selves to work? Because you're all in, top leadership positions now, people, and it's so inspiring, not just for people like myself, but those who are coming up after me. What tips and tricks would you give people? How did you do it? Who wants to go first? Because I know Sohail's like, I don't want to go first. Go on.
So I'm happy to go first. So I do a weekly message into the organisation. My background is Nigerian. I was born in Nigeria. And so I talk about my life outside of work. And it was really interesting because we've got the Lionesses in the final of the FIFA World Cup. But a week ago, they were facing Nigeria. So I wrote about the fact, in fact, it was the Monday morning when my message goes out, that I am coming in, writing this message, torn between, is it Nigeria going to win? Is England going to win? Whatever the outcome, I was going to win. And of course, I did win, because in the end, England did win. And so talking about the things that matter to me. This week, we've had A-level results come out. And part of my message this week was, those of you who are expecting A-level results, whatever the outcome, what's important is your young person still has the world at their oyster. So there's something about showing your lived experience, not being afraid to talk about who makes you who you are, but encouraging people to also be who they are. And I think that makes a difference to colleagues, because I'm hoping that they see me more than just, oh, this is a chief executive. Actually, I'm a human being like the rest of them. I have the same challenges as they do, and therefore actually they can also live their best selves while they're at work.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Anybody else?
A simple thing we do is, so on the sort of key faith days or other key markers in people's sort of culture, we bring food to the office. It's called a fuddle. And we've got lots of new converts to lentil curries. Dal's very popular, and obviously pizza. So there's a cross-section of food people bring in themselves, and that's how we sort of get into a discussion with new people arriving on our floor. People get to talk about their culture and food, and it breaks down conversation. But also it's interesting, you're talking about the football. So many years ago there was a Norman Tebbit test, wasn't there? Do you support England or do you support another team living in this country? And this where intersectionality really comes in, doesn't it? Because I can support. So if Uganda ever plays, that'll be my first team I'll support, because I was born in Kampala. But and then it might be Pakistan, it might be India, it might be somebody else. So England will really come to third in the packing order, because you've got allegiances. But that doesn't make you any less English or proud to be, in this country, does it? If you support another team, so it was a bit of a false fallacy, wasn't it? The Norman Tebbit test.
Have any of you ever felt like your identity, you had to change your identity to get to where you are, or to kind of go forward? Did you ever feel like that had to be compromised and you had to overcome that challenge?
So I would say, I mean, equality, diversity, inclusion in Bradford District and Craven, we call it equality, diversity, and belonging. So I remember, and something stick with you. So last year when we launched our Reducing Inequalities Alliance in Bradford District and Craven, our EDI lead Zara, she asked a question in her presentation: what is the opposite of belonging? What is the antonym of belonging? It's fitting in. Okay, so when you are trying to fit in to a system, then you need to change yourself to fit in. What we call it belonging, because we want people to belong, whoever you are. And I would say in my journey into this, and I will go back to what Foluke was saying, that bring your, because my main passion, you know, within this is around inequalities, health inequalities. When we call about health inequalities, it's people are dying early. People who are living in deprived areas, they are dying early. They are living a lot, they are spending a lot of their life in ill health. And I can bring my past and who I are into shaping the why of the work we are doing. So I was born in Lahore. I wasn't born in Bradford. I was born in Lahore in a neighborhood not dissimilar from Bradford. And I say it whenever I am forming that why. I have seen deprivation. I have seen what does it mean, how does it feel to get to rise from the deprivation into, and that is what I bring here. So it in terms of, and I would also say that not all the change is bad. British culture actually gives a lot of good things as well. So I have changed, but I have changed for good as well. So in terms of your leadership skills, in terms of your leadership journey, in terms of, you know, the change that you get into your communication, into engagement, into working with your colleagues, not all change is bad. But what we don't want people to do is to try to fit in. We want people to belong.
That's amazing. That's a really brilliant point. And just a reminder to our viewers that there is a chat function on Teams. If you want to speak to your fellow viewers, if you'd like to ask a question to our panelists, then please use the dedicated question and answer function in Teams, and we'll pass those questions on to the panelists later in this session. Does anybody else want to add to that? Quick one.
I want to, because when you Google Woodwork Archibong online and anything about authenticity, one of the things that will come up will be a few talks that I've given about how do I create my own authentic path, and how do I make that work for me in the office. And I often give an example of when I got my professorship in 2004, I had a colleague who walked up to me and said, you know, when your appointment was announced on Friday, I thought on Monday I will wake up to a UD Archibong in maybe grey suit, maybe formal casual or informal casual, and I just thought I was going to be completely lost in this organization. But today is Monday and you're in one of those, your African jackets, and I feel I belong here. I really think that we are in for a fantastic ride. I'm saying this to say something. I think whoever you are is the best you are. And authenticity for me is so real, because if I pretend to be you, I will perform worse. So to be at my best performance, I have to wake up in the morning and say, what's my path today? And I get out of the house knowing that I'm not going to fake who I am. And this is what we try to create at the University of Bradford. And I tell this story a lot of times where I've had instances of colleagues who have lived parallel lives. They come to the car park, a different person, and they walk into the office, a different person. And I've had experiences of having to sit with people to say, how can we work together to make you you? And a big one for me has been a colleague who was living in two genders, one in the car park and one in the office, until I just said, listen, you've come to work with me. How do we make it work? And that was how her gender transition started and ended. And we had a massive activity across not just our team, but the whole corridor, the whole professional services, for people to understand where my colleague has been and where she is now. So I think it's really important to remember this. If you fake who you are, you will not belong, you will not thrive, you will not make a difference. So this is so crucial.
I think that it's a really interesting point and so important. But I'm just thinking about, you know, young people particularly who are just starting on their career ladder, and it is frightening and overwhelming, especially now when everything costs so much and people don't get permanent positions, you know, you're on short contracts most of the time. I feel like they're encouraged, or there's a kind of pressure to conform. So it's a bit like, well, I'm going to tone down my accent. I'm not going to go in wearing these clothes. I'm going to, they often say about bosses that they promote those that look like them, right? So what practical tips, and Kim, I'm going to get you to come in because you've been mute. What practical tips would you give to young people who have these amazing, you know, identities and come from rich heritages and cultures, and they can offer so much in their organisations, but are just a bit like, oh, this is my first job, this is my first go, what can I do?
As I was listening to you, I was thinking how much of my, start of my career I wasted trying to be somebody else. And, so I just had a big birthday quite recently, and it's felt like a bit of a milestone. I'm thinking, actually, this is the next chapter of my life. I'm going to be completely who I am. And I've been able to be that more, actually, I think, in my job in Bradford than I have before when I worked in the public sector, where I spent a lot of the start of my career wearing grey suits, and really too high heels as well. That was the other thing. So I thought about how much I changed myself, and whether that was to do with my ethnicity, like my mum's Chinese Malay, my dad's English, or because I was a woman, or because I was a young woman, and quite ambitious in my career. So, and I think it probably was a bit of all of those things. I was talking with Foluke before about, because and it's sad that you feel you can be more yourself when you are more senior, because you're not having to try as hard, and that we need to think about as leaders, how do we break that so that people can bring themselves to work from the start? Because as you say, when you bring your whole self to work, you perform better, you do everything is better, and I don't regret my path. I've had a fantastic opportunity, but I feel a bit sad for my earlier self, thinking, well, why did I spend so much time feeling like I had to be something that I wasn't?
Yeah. Because I think there is a deficit approach to the work that we do around diversity, which means if we keep doing things to the individuals, they will suddenly change and everything will be so okay. And I often turn it on its head. I want that young person to see transparently in the leaders that it's okay to be yourself. So I would tend to invest more of my time working with managers, leaders at all levels, to actually accept the authenticity that colleagues bring, and to do everything they can to actually be visibly encouraging people to be themselves. So I always say to people, if you gave me £100 to do any work, I will spend £60 to £70 on developing others to accept who the other. So by the time I do that, the work I'll be doing and saying to the young person is, we are under new management. And you imagine the look on your face when you go in a shop that has been horrible, and then suddenly there's under new management. And that approach means I go in knowing that nobody's going to shout at me. I go in just asking questions. So if you think it that way, let's switch it back and say, for the young person, I want them to see visible leadership that encourages you to be yourself. And then the work is done. 70% of the work is done. The rest is for you to just test the water slowly and, hey, here I am, authentic.
Brilliant. Sorry, Chancellor.
So I think that is really important point, but I think that the tip for for the young people coming into these positions, one thing I would say, reach out. We in the leadership, we are open for anyone to reach out, and I love when graduate management trainees or people who are starting their career, they reach out to me. And as a leader, the best thing you can do is to develop others. That is the main part of your job as in a leadership position. I have, recently I had a graduate management trainee who had actually started in Airedale, and he reached out to me from some other and wanted to talk about reducing inequalities alliance and the strategic opportunities, and he was really passionate. He wants to do something, and now from that conversation he is now able to go get into a West Yorkshire strategic program of work that will actually enrich his CV. And so reach out. Okay, just don't be afraid. The senior leadership is open, and we are saying it here. We are open. So let's reach out, and we will do whatever we can.
I'm going to make it more personal now. I want to know what drives you. So you've all got to this stage where you're all exerting influence. Has there been a moment in your life where you've thought, okay, I can look back at my career, or not just my career, but my personal life, and think, oh yeah, there were moments here, here, and here where I realised actually I want to go into broadcasting. I want to report. I love people. There were key moments in my life. Have you had a key moment or a turning point that has really driven you to get to where you are today? We'll start with you, Foluke. Go on.
So I'll link that to the first, the last question actually, because one of the things I was thinking about in terms of as I grew up and some of the moments that I had. So I came to the UK when I was 11 with my family and changed schools. I was 11 or 12, and so I started in year 8, which is the most awkward year to start in a school, because year 7 have just formed friendships, and then you come in and you're trying to break in. And that point about fitting in absolutely was something for me, because you're trying to break into newly formed friendship groups, and that really challenged me. And I only know this on reflection, but then I changed schools again at year 12 to do my A-levels. And I remember that the school I went to was a sixth form school. And I actually remember thinking in my head, well, we're all going to be new. Therefore, I'm going to be who I am, and it doesn't matter. Because actually, I used to be quite shy as a child. Most people don't. And I still am a little bit shy, but you guys don't need to say anything to that. But I used to be quite quiet and shy. But actually, I remember going through that process. We're all going to be new in the year 12. Therefore, I can be who I am, put myself forward. So that was the first thing, turning point. I think the turning points in my career have been about me being empowered. So Sohail's point about being open. I trained as a clinical scientist, and in my training year, I had a supervisor who was really supportive, and I worked across 3 different hospitals, and I had a routine, Mondays and Tuesdays here, Wednesday there, Thursday here, whatever. And I remember one occasion he said to me, I'll see you next Tuesday. And I said, oh no, actually next Tuesday I'm going to be at this hospital doing this. And he just said to me, Foluke, if I don't see you, I'm going to assume you're doing something useful somewhere else. I found that so liberating, that somebody trusted me enough not to man-mark me, but believe in me. And that's really marked my career journey in terms of how I work with colleagues, is that it's more about outputs, it's more about supporting them and enabling them. And it's not about looking over people's shoulders. And for me, so that was one of the critical points for me about how do I approach my work? How do I work with colleagues? And that stayed with me regardless of the roles that I have, is that actually, am I making a difference? So he inspired me to make a difference, because what he was judging me on was more about, am I making a difference, rather than counting the pieces of how many hours am I working and how many pieces of paper did I produce and those sorts of things. And I think the final turning point for me was around understanding the difference that people make to people. And that's what led me in my leadership journey in the NHS, was that we have an impact on people. And we have an impact on people wherever they work. So having worked as a clinical scientist for a number of years, I understood that the difference I make in that little corner of the hospital that I worked in has a long-lasting impact on somebody else. And so actually, my contribution is just as important as the next person. And therefore, it's not about whether you're a doctor or a nurse. It doesn't matter whether you're a cleaner or an administrator. If those people don't exist in their roles, the function will not work, and therefore that's what makes a team.
Thank you, Foluke.
Thank you. And for me, it's what's driven us is role models. So for me, it was my brother who was doing lots of charitable work, even through sort of primary school, very early years. And I saw his dedication to helping others. And that sort of drove me down the public service route. So if it might been my own choice, my favourite subject was biology, I would have been a scientist. But I got into that kind of work and I've enjoyed it. 3 decades in the council. And what drives me still is I hear people like Nigel Guy, Charles Dacres, who are great. They've been behind the Windrush celebrations, which have been fantastic. But when they walk around town, they've said, we've not seen any reflection of our communities in Bradford City. There's no monuments, there's no inscriptions, there's nothing to say, you know, our communities contribute to this city. So that's driven me 4 years ago when, you know, again, through schools, people were asking, one kid was asking another kid, what are you doing here, kind of questions. So we embarked on a project which is coming to fruition this November, and it's a Commonwealth War Memorial. So it's acknowledging all the soldiers from across the world that contributed to the war effort to give us our freedoms and all the rest of it that goes with that. So that's like just making sure all our communities are reflected in this district in some way. And from that, we can go into education stuff in schools, you know, and lots of other outshoots from that project, and a phase 2, which we're hoping to incorporate more communities, like the Jewish community that contributed to this district as well. So there's a phase thing. So in November, we're going to have a memorial put in for the Commonwealth, also you know, the soldiers, Commonwealth countries that contributed. And Sabir, I think your granddad's got the medal too.
Yeah.
And he may be the one who lays the foundation stone. So we're looking at people who might inaugurate the memorial.
That's incredible.
Come a couple of months. So it's one to look out for. But that's going to really instill our presence and what the contribution we've made in this country. It's one small thing. But when we talk about memorials, we talk about heritage, we talk about contribution. There's a lot the communities are brought into this country, and they take a lot less out than they give.
That's
Yeah, I'm just going to follow. How can I follow that? Yeah, so I think for me, it's every so often I have to stop and reflect on my life, especially when, as an African, I believe that so many years, thousands and thousands of years, we've allowed other people to tell our stories, and that it is my time to tell my story. So I do a lot of storytelling in my presentations, and so it always leads me to reflect on an aspect of my life. And there's something about resilience that I've been looking at lately, and something dawned on me about how sometimes we overflog mentorship, and mentorship is fine, I'm not knocking it, but that next step is about sponsorship, sponsoring people to do things. And then it took me to an experience when I did my nurse training. I'm a nurse by background, and I love nursing. When I did my nurse training in my very first year, a lecturer spotted my talent and said, I can see that you're going to go very far. And this woman drove me from Calabar for 8 hours to go and pick a university form in another city to apply for my nurse training, university undergraduate program, and drove me back. Now, every time I reflect on what that woman did, I remember saying to myself, she opened the door and held it open for me to walk in. And I have been thinking about, you know, when you're working with people who are so marginalized, not just physically, but even mentally, thinking, can I get in to that door? Can I sit in that boardroom? What will be my first statement, and who's going to acknowledge it? Who's going to do X, Y, Z? And I have been thinking about it and thinking the best thing then for me to do, and I encourage other people to do, is to be door openers and door holders for other people to walk in, to the extent of actually sitting next to them to say, your first board meeting, I'm going to sit next to you so I can prime you, remind you, have you asked a question, have you done this? So that has really led to the way I conduct my business around supporting others. Yes, I do mentor, but I am really pushing for more sponsorship, because we're working with people who have been through years and years of marginalization to the extent that even when they are very qualified, they've got, you name it, but they have no confidence to walk through. So that for me was a moment which is really affecting the way I do things. The other thing is, Foluke thinks she's shy, but you have a shyer person, if there was a word like that. And I am now doing a lot of work in the university to actually put colleagues in front of our senior team. So I run fishbowl conversations a lot. And what I do for every Marking Any Legacy Month, Black History Month, LGBT History Month, I'll get people from that community and I'll put them in front of our senior leaders. And through fishbowl conversation, I take power from the senior leaders and give it to those individuals. They ask all the questions, they challenge. The senior leaders only say things when they're given permission to by the junior colleagues through first fishbowl conversations. And I think it's been really helpful to also get our leaders to have that cultural humility that is sometimes lacking in leaders. So I think there is something here for me about listening is fantastic, but it's actually having to respond appropriately and co-creating solutions with people through that kind of approach.
I think that touches on the next question. You've really done so well in highlighting that in terms of pathways, and I think Sohail will come to you just to go talking about. I'm really interested to know how we've heard about how Udi's doing it. How are you all creating pathways for not just younger people, but for your colleagues in your organisation so that they can come up through the system? But also, I think, is that, I always talk to people about when we go through certain institutions, those who come before us have had to fight certain fights. We don't want that to keep happening generation after generation. And my dad came to the UK as an immigrant. You guys know him, right? And he always talks about, 50 years on, I'm still dealing with the same thing. I don't want my kids to be talking about that. So what are you guys doing to create those pathways to allow that to happen? We've heard from Udi, Sohail.
So I think I will just, before I answer, about the pathways, I think that one thing that Udi said was quite important, that as leaders, we need to develop. I love quotes from Jalaluddin Rumi, in all my presentations. And one of the things he said that when I was clever, I wanted to change the world. And when I was wise, I started changing myself. So I think one thing, the first thing on getting onto the leadership ladder is self-belief. I can make a difference. And only I can tell myself that I can make a difference. Yes, there are other people in my path. There are loads of people, starting right from my mother, who actually instilled the values of equity, justice, kindness in me, empathy, all of that. So right from that, and then the leaders that you visit or you see, and I have been really, I would say, fortunate to have a lot of really good people in my life. One thing again, and I want to really talk to the medical, clinicians who want to come into the leadership position. One thing that every clinician who comes to a leadership position, we face a dilemma: are we making a difference? Okay, so I'm quite fortunate. I am a frontline clinician. I'm a general practitioner. I still see patients, and when I talk to them, I'm making difference to life of individuals. And there is this dilemma: is that where I'm making a difference, or is it when I come to a leadership position, when I start working with communities, with organizations? So I'll tell you a story where I found my light bulb moment in that, or I found my answer. It's when I started working on the Reducing Inequalities in Communities program. It's a program of a multi-million-pound program of work in Bradford district and Craven. Part of that, we had 20 projects, and one project was to look after people with multiple long-term conditions. And I was going on a home visit, and I saw that elderly lady, and I was able to organize a lot of help around her. And I was coming back, I called my senior manager and said, how many actually people we have had in this project that we have just started 6 months ago? And there were about 500 people. And that was a time that as a clinician, I am making a difference to the life of that individual. But because I was there in the clinical commissioning, in that organization, I actually was able to create something that is now touching the lives of hundreds of people. So that is, you can make a difference in wherever you are. In terms of the pathways that we are doing, I would touch on a couple of things. One is from the West Yorkshire point of view, we have BAME fellowship, so or what we call now it's just the fellowships. So that is specifically for people from ethnic minority background, for we say band 7, 8A, 8B above, so that we can give them the opportunity to work in a stretch, what we call a stretch opportunity, in a senior position in an organization or in a system, to actually give them those skills that can then help them into applying and getting the next level of their job. And that has been really successful. The cohort of people who I think now we have the third cohort going in West Yorkshire. The cohort of leaders, people who have gone into that BAME fellowship have secured, a lot of them have secured high level positions now. In my work in the West Yorkshire Health Inequalities Academy, we have a program of work called Health Equity Fellows, and now we are calling them Improving Population Health Fellows. And they are people from our system who want to know more about what can they do in their role, in whatever they do, to reduce inequalities and improve population health. And we are giving them opportunity, not just practical opportunities, mentorship opportunities. We're giving them opportunities as an academic opportunities to develop themselves and to give them that fundamental confidence that I can make a difference.
Okay, fantastic. Kim, what about you guys? What would you say that you're doing to kind of create those pathways?
I suppose before I come on to that, I wanted to talk about the importance of recognising your own privilege when you're a leader. My parents weren't privileged at all, that whether it was my mum growing up in Malaysia or my dad growing up in Wythenshawe in Manchester, but I have recognised that they have enabled me to live a very privileged life. And then now as a leader, I have privilege and access to things that so many other people don't. So in this space, the first thing is about really checking your privilege. And I've had the privilege to surround myself with people who've allowed me to see things that I couldn't see before, and I still do all the time, learn new things all the time. If you as a leader are not prepared to do that and be open and humble to think, I didn't see that before, or I wasn't prepared to go and be intentional or proactive in learning about different people's lives, different cultures, and do the deep learning, the challenging learning, you will never really do anything meaningful in this space, I think, at all. So that's been a lot, big learning lessons for me. Two amazing women, Penny Wangari-Jones from Racial Justice Network, Kenese from Wellsprings Together. Those are two amazing women who really help me to learn all the time. I see as sort of, I guess, more like reciprocal mentoring, we learn together. And that allows me to think about the work that I'm doing and how, I've got my own ideas and I do all the time, try to open doors, because I've been lucky to have amazing mentors, unofficial and official, sponsors who've helped me to get to where I am, and I really try to model that now. But sometimes as a leader you can't see the disadvantage that people are facing, or the fact that they might not feel able to reach out for lots and lots of different reasons. So I'm trying to continue to learn about what the barriers are, because the more senior you get, the further away you are from that. So you have to be really proactive in doing that continually.
Mahmood, what about you?
I mean, the strapline really is, for what they say about Windrush is we stand on the shoulders of giants, and those are the people who preceded us. So, if you look back 40 years, I was a football. So if you walked into the wrong neighbourhood, people like the National Front and those Combat 18 and all the other kind of acronyms they have, could kick you around quite freely without much recourse to any justice or anything. It was quite common. Moving 40 years on, I've been in the public service for 3 decades, and I was in lots of meetings where, I was the only brown face. It'd be all white kind of panels deciding on what things should happen in communities without the lived experience, without the knowledge, really. So that's really changed over the last 3 decades. And what are we doing now? So currently I'm sat amongst A-list of changes in Bradford. People make a real change, and we've got the A list here, and we can see a very diverse panel of people who are now leading on things in the district. So that's a massive change for me from what I've seen. But what we're doing practically, so there's three things really. So in the volunteering field, we're really pushing volunteering. We've got a Citizen Coin app, which allows people to volunteer, get reward, but also create a CV. So if they're isolated, they have low skills, they want to get engaged and want to belong, that's one way they can do it. They can make friends, they can get involved in activities, and then get a CV, and hopefully they can move on. ESOL, we're really pushing as well across the district. Some people, again, have got that skill and ability to make their lives better for themselves and their families. So that's one side where we're really helping people get up the ladder. On the recruitment side, we've got a really diverse team in Stronger Communities. So we've actively made sure that we've gone out and we've had a really reflective team of the communities we serve. And one of our roles in our service is looking after areas of protected characteristics, making those communities are safe, belong, can celebrate themselves and celebrate their cultures. So that's part of our remit as well, and we're constantly doing that. So for example, tomorrow the Hindu community is there 40 years tomorrow with the temple they've made on Little Horton Lane, and they'll be bringing their statues and things, you know, into the parade in City Park tomorrow. And again, every faith will be doing something, and every culture will be doing something, and we're always trying to support that. Synagogue gets their 150th year this year as well, and we'll be supporting their activities as well. So staff getting to know the communities from the communities and serving the communities, that's really important. And the third thing we're doing is we've got a strategic board. So there's several boards, and the highest board in Bradford is the Wellbeing Board, which all the senior public sector people sit on. But we've got a board that reports to that called the Stronger Communities Board. And it's the only one, I think, probably in the country that has councillors from the 5 constituencies, with residents from the 5 constituencies, and a cross-section of people from the voluntary sector and across the board, really. And Foluke is a member of that board as well. So it's really representative, and it can really discuss issues that are going on around cohesion, community integration, and it can feed up the chain to the Wellbeing Board. So through all those mechanisms, we've got opportunities for people to engage, get involved in the discussion, but create opportunities and pass on information across the board to all the communities. So networks, partnerships, massive area of work that we're really supporting, making sure every community in Bradford has an equal say, commitment, resource allocation. So when I look at funding for the voluntary sector, I was just with the councillors yesterday, a lot of funding goes to area committees, and we're making sure we do formulas for deprivation, we do formulas for indexes for people living in certain areas that are not getting seen, not getting heard, and they get the resources that they deserve as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And Foluke, what would you say you do?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I was thinking about, reflecting on Udi's point about how do we create leaders that are open, I think it's also the conversations we have with the people around us, the people we connect to. And thinking about Kim's point about you cannot reach every single individual. Not everybody feels able to come and talk to you, nor do you have the opportunity to meet every person who's coming up the ladder. But there is something about how you create environments that becomes much more open and transparent and willing to try new things. And so a lot of my conversations with leaders, with senior managers in my organizations, with partners, is really testing this issue about the individual, but also testing this individual about the benefits of bringing diversity and why that's really important. And in the health sector, for example, I did a session recently at a university, and I repeated it in my organisation, where we were talking about disparities in healthcare around race as an example. And my example was, how do you know when I'm in pain? And my lived example is I was on an A&E trolley, writhing in pain, and the doctor that was with me did not recognise I had pain. 2 nurses walked past, came back and said, you might want to give her some painkillers. And at that point he said, are you in pain? And why did he not recognise I had pain? Because the triggers he's looking for doesn't exist for me. He's looking for a change of colour in my face. He's not going to see that. When you talk about meningitis, and I remember when I was young and meningitis was really rife, they would say, take a glass and hold it against the skin and look for the purple rash. You're not going to see that. This is why it is really important to have diversity in all aspects, because that is when you really understand what's going on for individuals. But I also think that's what's really important, is that we are all still very different. Udi and I might be both from Nigeria, but we're both very different. And so even within the person and within the same culture, we're talking about South Asian heritage, individuals from South Asia are very different. And so there is something about actually that's why the whole is so much better than the 1+1. And so having those conversations to really trigger those thought pieces for people about these are the things you're missing and this is why we're finding ourselves where we are. And I'm really keen that people don't see me as representation of Nigerians or representation of black people in leadership, because I'm just one person. I am me. You will never get another me, and you're all really grateful for that. But I am only one me, and somebody else will come and sit alongside me and bring something different. And it's the mix of all the different skills, understanding, backgrounds, lived experiences that brings the richness. And for me, those conversations are really important to influence, because I'm not going to be in every single interview room. I'm not going to be in every single selection panel. But if I'm sowing thought pieces for people, for them to really think about the decision-making process they're going through and what's influencing them, you make a change that way.
Yeah, I completely relate to that, because I remember when I started at the BBC, people had this unrealistic expectation of, oh, she's going to do this, and she's going to do this, and she's going to tell my story, and I want you to come here. And it was a bit like, no, I'm not your PR person. You know, I've got my own feelings, I've got my own ideas, I've got my own lived experience, my own views and how stories should be told. So I think it is that you're seen as you represent this kind of monolithic kind of society, a monolithic community, when you don't. We're all different, and we all disagree and agree on different things. Go for it, go on.
I haven't said something. Right, okay. So I'm now going to wear a different hat. So this is not only about Bradford University. So I chair the Systems Equalities Group for the city and reporting directly to the Health and Wellbeing Board. And Zara is the lead Strategic Equality, Diversity and Inclusion lead. And one of the big things that I have done when I got invited to take on the responsibility of chairing that group, I did something and I just said, I'm sorry, we've got so many action plans and I'm just fed up. I don't want action plans, I want actions. So we decided to then pick a few principles and use those principles to identify projects that we really want to hone in on. And one of the big ones that we have as part of the program is really to challenge the lack of representation in our leadership across the system, across the city in particular. If you recall, during the George Floyd times, institutions sent out all these solidarity messages, and one of the key challenges, and I enjoyed it every time I look on social media and somebody was saying, yeah, if you really mean what you are saying, can you just show us the image of your senior team? So one of the things that we are doing as part of the Systems Equalities Group is actually to support all systems organizations to have actions that will promote diversity in their leadership team. So Zara is working around with all organizations and just checking that we are embedding some of those actions into everything that we do. So in Bradford University, for example, we've just gained our Race Equality Charter, and one of the big things that we've built into our KPIs is improving on the representation in the professoriate, in senior management team, in all levels of leadership, and making sure that minority ethnic colleagues are involved in things, and I think it's really important. But I do take the point from all panel members, but Foluke just said it, it is not just about representation, it's about participation as well. And I'm really keen to push that. Whilst we are pushing for this representation, we have to also think about transformational diversity. How do these individuals help in the transformation of our organizations?
Thank you. We've got 2 questions that the audience have sent in, but before we get to them, we're here, just a reminder, we're here to celebrate South Asian Heritage Month. What are you doing to build awareness and education around South Asian heritage so that colleagues from other backgrounds can get involved too? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to go first. So I mentioned earlier that we have Indian nurses in our organisation. We have nurses from every background in our organisation, but the reason why the Indian nurses pop into my head is we went through a deliberate international recruitment drive a couple of years ago, and that brought across about 100 Indian nurses to the organisation. And only 2 months ago, we celebrated what we call the OSCEs, and that is the practical exam they have to go through that confirms that they are now eligible to work in the UK and their registration is all full. And what was really important for me in that celebration was that we achieved 100% pass rate. And this was through sponsorship, supporting, encouraging our new colleagues to really embrace what it means to be a nurse in the UK. But part of that was also helping them settle in. And so what we now have is a group of nurses who are supporting each other, have built a network embedded in the community locally. And also we have I'm feeling really proud about the fact that we've just done that celebration event, and the beautiful clothes they were wearing, the food was amazing. That was the best part of the event. Never mind that they all got 100%, that was amazing. But it was that culture we were all able to see. And we have a team who have just returned back from India, and we've got 40 more nurses and colleagues to join us. And the excitement that that's created in the organisation. And I know that when they first arrived, there was some trepidation on both sides. How are we going to cope? Do they speak English? Will they understand? But actually, everybody's been on this journey together, and they are so appreciated. And many of those nurses now are senior leaders in our organisation. They're running wards. Some of them will become matrons soon. And so when you can start to see the impact that those individuals are having, how they're embedded in the organisation and they are committed to the organisation, it really just gives me joy to see that, and that we've got more colleagues. And actually people are now really looking forward to them coming, and we're thinking, so how do we do the same and better? What did we learn from last time? And how can we get the 100% sooner rather than later and continue that record we've set? So that's just one example of the sorts of things that we're doing to really celebrate those who are making a contribution to the local community.
Fantastic. Sounds amazing. Anybody else want to jump in?
I love hearing that story, because my mum came to England to train to be a nurse when she was 18, and she didn't have that experience. So it's really nice hearing that experience. Just one thing I'd pick out because I was just reading it last night. Two of my colleagues, Yasmin and Noreen, have written amazing pieces about their heritage, actually. And they're not just short little blogs. They've really gone into talking about their family and what it was like growing up specifically in Bradford as in the Pakistani community. And I just loved reading it. They were quite detailed. They really went into the stories of their lives, and that was brilliant, I think. And colleagues who've read it have been saying, wow, this just gave me such a good insight that you just don't get on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's been really good for us.
Yeah, I think on that I would say, it's getting better. Per se, it's more. So, for example, in clinical commissioning groups and ICB, and it's like, whenever there is Ramadan, there is more awareness of Ramadan. There are there are messages that your colleagues would be fasting and the respect and what Ramadan entails. Diwali, the celebration of Eid, Christmas. It's all really coming together, if we say, and there is more and more awareness and active participation and celebration of this diversity.
And it should be, because you're all in these posts we've been hearing about how you're promoting it, so that's fabulous. Okay, we're going to turn to these questions now, and the first one is, how would you propose countering racism through culture change whilst avoiding performative allyship, as we can't recruit ourselves out of institutionalized racism? Who wants to answer that first? So how would you propose countering racism through culture change whilst avoiding performative allyship, as we can't recruit ourselves out of institutionalized racism?
So I think we talked about earlier, didn't we? How do we make opportunities for people to gain employment and create that diversity in workforce? And we talked about the example we used for the Eastern Europeans to get up the ladder in the council, sort of work opportunities, and some of them have now moved on from those junior kind of roles. So for me, it's just looking at the system change. You know, are the systems appropriate for what the kind of the people we want to bring in to our organisations, and can they bring their whole selves? Can they bring, because we've just said, haven't we? You can only be the best you can be. You know, if you try to be somebody else, you're giving half, you know, an effort to a job or something. So you want to bring your whole self. So we've got to make sure that the system change is happening, and they do take time, because a lot of it is, you know, institutionalized for decades, and it's to do with people and it's to do with systems. So eroding that slowly, in some places it takes a long time. It's a drip effect. In other places it can be quite sudden. Somebody can come in, you know, quite brilliant and say, well, you know, this doesn't work for you really. We're not getting the outputs, desires we want. But if we just make this change, we've got the people in who can do the job, who understand it. And in your case, it's really interesting about people who have that lived experience and make the change.
I think for me, we've just got to literally start from the beginning. And the beginning is to acknowledge that there is a problem. Sometimes I think people fake it when they think there can never be no racism here. We're such liberal people in our education institutions, and I have to stop them to say, okay, if that's the case, why have we ended up in a situation where there are only 35-ish black female professors in the UK? Is there something that might be a problem? So that acknowledgement is really important. And I work with organizations and insist that you start by having that organizational diagnosis and acceptance that there is a problem. Because until you diagnose a problem as a doctor, you don't start treating, do you? So that's, for me, is the first step, is that acknowledgement. The next bit for me is if we want to avoid performative allyship, we do need to support leaders, educate, do things that you can provoke that visible, compassionate, inclusive, you name it, leadership. So that strong leadership is important. The other thing for me is about creating opportunities for people to actually have conversations, dialogue, whatever you want to call it, and accepting that racism exists gives you an opportunity to call it by its name. I listened to a particular conversation by a professor from Harvard the other day, and there's this movement now about naming racism and calling it that. What's the point in trying to use
skirting
other
around
words,
it,
skirting around it? Call it that, so we can all have a proper conversation about it. So that conversation is important. The next thing for me, it's about using evidence. I'm really sorry, guys, if we keep asking to show me the data, we are being stupid, because we all know there's a problem. We started with acknowledging a problem. The evidence we collect now should be the ongoing developmental evaluation to tell us that what we're doing is working or not working. So I believe very strongly that any organization that needs to avoid that performative allyship, particularly from leaders, have got to follow a few things, key in which is to say there is a problem. Now we have a problem, let's solve it together and gather people around to have a conversation so you can create the solution. And very lastly, I believe that we need to move. Allyship is a good place. We need to get to the next level. Emma Dabiri calls this coalition. We need to come into everywhere thinking this is not just about a few BAME people feeling good in the workplace. It's about all of us, because one party engages, all parties engage.
Yeah. Anybody want to add to that?
I think the acknowledgement is really key. Call it what it is. And calling racism, it actually gets your attention, it gets everyone's attention. So that is really important, and then we can do something about it, whether it's, you know, that glass ceiling effect or whatever, you know, we can do something about it. I think the other thing, and looking at the things that we do in Bradford District and Craven, West Yorkshire, it takes time. Culture, the definition of culture is the way we do things here, and the culture change would be to change the way we do things here, and that takes time. Also, I would say what I have seen in our partnership is actually the and around UK as well, and we know we know data for a long time. You know, data tells us it's enriching their data with the personal stories. That is important too, because that is then the combination of heart and mind. The logic and the emotional aspect, and that tells the real story of what is happening. And the other thing I would really say, we have to get out of this mindset of it's someone else's problem and someone else is going to sort it out, to what can I do to sort it out, and then what can we do to sort it out. And whatever I've seen, where I've seen that the change in culture is acknowledgement, coalition of people who really believe that this is a problem and I can do something about it, collectively reaching out to senior leadership, creating allies. It's important that we need to bring the actual problem to the decision making table, and then we can do something about it.
And before we, Kim, I saw you open your mouth. Go for it. What do you want to say?
I was just, some of my learning around this, of the past few years is about we have to be prepared to have some really uncomfortable conversations. And all of us has to do that. And it can be really easy to move in. And I've sat in a lot of these conversations where people, and maybe I've done it as well, but have become defensive. And I've tried to learn about that, and learn about, I'm not white, but I've learned about white fragility and I've been in conversation with people, I'm not racist, how dare you call me racist? And, well, it's not my fault. So it's really easy to get stuck in places where people feel defensive, cross, angry, and then they're not open to learning and thinking, what's the other perspective in here. So I think as a district, as organisations, how do we create spaces for people to have those conversations safely, and also create learning environments that are going to be hard. And I think those do need to start at the tops of organisations, with boards, with senior teams like Yudi was talking about, and then and us investing intentionally in creating those spaces for our staff to have those conversations, because I think we have to be realistic that there's different levels of racism. There's the racism that we might see really outright in social media or when you're walking down the street, people, but then there's when you scrape below the surface, not very far, and there's underlying racism, and how do we surface that and then have those conversations? It's not an easy thing, but I think we all have to do it.
We've got two more questions. So we've been the curry capital of the world for 6 years in a row and are now City of Culture 2025. What do you feel South Asians have brought to the district, and what are you particularly impressed about or proud of? Well, that's an interesting question. Go on.
Well, contributing to the national dish, which is chicken tikka curry, isn't it? It's the national dish. So we're taking fish and chips, which one might probably. But the economy really. So after the Second World War, we know how the communities came, from different countries and supported the economy here. The culinary delights of Bradford are certainly up there. But there's lots of the mill workers, the people who worked in factories and lots of different foundries and everything else, the backbone of building this country back from its knees basically after the Second War. So there's a massive contribution we can talk about. But economy, culture is another one, isn't it? And talking about 2025, the rich heritage of culture from all the different subcontinent. You've got the Indian, Pakistani, you've got the poetry, you've got the dance, you've got the drama. It's all there, isn't it? You've got Lollywood, Bollywood, and all the woods that are going in the district as well. So there's lots we can talk about really, but I'll open the floor to anybody else.
The women as well. Like for me, if someone has asked me that question, what do you feel South Asians have brought to the district and what you're particularly impressed about? I do a lot of, my mum was a housewife, like lady of luxury they call it now. And my dad was, came here as an immigrant, worked from scratch. My granddad, as you've mentioned, is a veteran of World War II. They came from abject poverty. But I saw, the soft skills that I didn't realise that I had that are now so useful and valuable in broadcasting and journalism I got from my mum, because she was a carer. She cared not just for the 6 daughters that she had, but for the street, because when people went out to work, they'd leave their mums out, their elderly mothers and fathers at home, and my mum would prepare these big dishes of curries that she'd go around and feed everybody. And she saw that as an act of service that she had to do. And I think often we talk about the men who ran the corner shops and went on to build huge empires in the takeaways and the restaurants. But actually it was the women at home who allowed them to go out and do that, who taught us all to be, you know, multi and bilingual and trilingual, that gave us now, the next generation, the skills. And so my mum always says to me, you know, I didn't go to university or travel the world, but my daughters are. And I think that's incredible. So I completely agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. And it's also other, you know, sectors. Look at NHS, you know, diversity in NHS. It's and our, you know, any caring professions, and you know, carers, social workers, social services, voluntary and community sector. It's everywhere. That's, you know, the what we, you know, or South Asians have brought here. And yes, the curry capital, you know, that's one of the big things. So yeah, it's the diversity. It's the diversity of thought that brings innovation and you know and the cultures and improvement in the cultural heritage. So it's all of that.
And I think I'm very proud of the vibrancy of the city because of the you know, I have been to different cities in the UK, and I'm going, I think, for goodness sake, I'll never live there. I live in Bradford because of that diversity of thought, the vibrancy. We've got a very large population of South Asian students on campus, and it would be so boring otherwise. And I do agree with contributions to the culture of the city generally. But above all, for me, is those kind of specific things that you couldn't find anywhere else, that you see in Bradford, that you would wake up on a Sunday and go to a place and eat very authentic cuisine that you will not see anywhere else. It's so unique. And if you think about how these in itself helps the mental health of the people that live around you, that vibrancy, and I keep using that word because it means a lot to me. I've just started walking again in the morning, and you go into, Lister Park, and you see the people around. You see those women who just wake up every morning walking, chatting, having a conversation, and somebody stopping to say hello. It's not there. I won't tell you which city I did my PhD, and when I came here, I thought, God, I will never go back there, because here people say hello to each other. So, Bradford is the place.
We've got time for another question. So this one is, sometimes cultural or faith practices can come into conflict with working routines, for example, regular prayer. What can we do to better facilitate these? That's an interesting question as well.
So I'll come in there, because I think that there's something about, it comes back to our openness and our willingness to consider the needs of everybody. And we talk about flexible working. So if we can facilitate flexible working for colleagues, either because they have parenting responsibilities or caring responsibilities, or indeed we have colleagues that are smokers and will nip out for a smoke, and we accept that or create capacity for them to do that. We also need to think about how do we flex for other people for other reasons. And certainly for me, when I think about flexible working, I often say to my colleagues, you don't need a reason to want to work flexibly, as in I don't want you to say, oh, it's because I have this child and the only reason why I can have flexible working is because I've got young children. And certainly in terms of working late, long hours working, if people normally work 9 to 5, 8 to 4, I will encourage people to go home, and I'll say invent a reason to go home. And it doesn't have to be because you're doing a school pickup. It may be because you like golf. It may be because you want to go and hang out with a friend. It doesn't matter. You're entitled to work in a way that's as flexible as possible, that doesn't diminish the way the business works. So it's that balance. So I'm not saying, well, you can do what you want when you want, because actually at the end of the day, the organization's there to deliver a purpose. But there is something about the creativity that we all need to have about how do we enable the balance between the needs of the individual and the needs of the organization. And that part of that's compromise. And it's about how do you bring that together. And if you do it with that lens, you will bring the equity you're looking for. Because I think sometimes people over worry about equity in that context. So where you work in an environment where as long as the job gets done, it's fine, actually you need to think about the flexibility. In some other scenarios, it might be harder, But the challenge for us is how close can we get to it? And it requires compromise on both sides, regardless of the reason.
We can take one more answer to that question.
No, just to add, I agree everything with what Foluke said, but the only thing is to make the physical facilities available. So you need somewhere you can wash, do ablution, and somewhere to pray. So in our building, it's been very difficult to give up a meeting room because the demand is so much. But management has created that. There's a room now where there's a male-female multi-faith prayer room, you know, and there's washing facilities. So that means you're not going away from the building. You know, you're spending your 5-10 minutes where you might just go and have a fag or something else. You're having your prayer and you're getting back to your work, so it doesn't really break it up too much.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you all so much. Well, we've reached the end of today's session. We'll make sure that the video link is available after the session so you can watch it back later. Thank you to these unbelievable guests and leaders of our city and district. Thank you to everyone for watching and your questions today. We hope you've enjoyed it and found the session useful. I really have. I'm so inspired. From all of us here at University of Bradford Studio, goodbye. See you later.